Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report on the Real News Network. Remember, this show has a single purpose, holding the politically powerful institution of American policing accountable. To do so, we go beyond the headlines and explore both the politics and the policies that make law enforcement so resistant to change. And I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us, and we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to us. You can email us tips privately at par@therealnews.com and share evidence of police misconduct. You can also message us on the Police Accountability Report on Facebook or Instagram, or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can message me directly at Taya's Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. And please like and comment. I do read the comments, and I appreciate them. So today we're going to explore one of the most profound powers conferred upon police, the discretion to make life and death decisions. As we discussed on our last show, it's a capability police exercise here more often than in other countries. In fact, every year, American police kill roughly 1,000 people, almost a third of whom are unarmed. Some argue the reason for the high number of police-involved deaths is because of the low legal threshold for police to use force against us. And perhaps no case exemplifies that more than this recent conviction of Amber Geiger. Amber was a Dallas police officer who was charged with murder after she shot and killed Botham Jean. Geiger had entered Botham's apartment, one floor above hers, in September of 2018. Botham was sitting on the couch eating ice cream when she shot him in the chest. She claimed he failed to obey her order and approached her in a menacing fashion. However, ballistics revealed Botham was seated when the fatal bullet pierced his body. But the story that received less attention is how quickly and reflexively American police use lethal force. I think this story exemplifies a truism in this country, that police are given incredibly wide leeway to shoot at us. Stephen, can you explain a little bit as to why they have so much leeway?
Well, it's really interesting because, the officer was just found guilty, Geiger was just found guilty of murder, which, no one expected. And there was a total shock, right, throughout the country. People were saying, in fact, I was watching the news this morning on CNN, they said a shocking verdict. And it's hard to understand why that would be shocking if someone entered someone's apartment unlawfully and just shot them within seconds. It all unfolded within seconds. It wasn't like they had any sort of continuum of force use, which is some departments demand that. But she just said, within, I think it was in 20 or 30 seconds, she shot him in the chest. And of course, argued at first, tried to say he was coming towards her. And I think it shows and exemplifies that, the wide discretion is given to the police officer, not the person who shot, in terms of arguing why this happens. And it's something that, we've seen over and over again. But I think the reaction to the verdict against her is exemplar of why, what sort of the tradition in this country of saying, as long as the officer has reasonable fear for his or her safety or the safety of others, they can shoot. And that's a pretty low bar when you think about it, because it's an awfully subjective, assessment of a situation.
Of course, we wouldn't be able to fully comprehend the ramifications of the use of force in the country without the work of outstanding journalists. And one of those, Daniel Gross, is joining us today. Gross is an investigative journalist for the Greenville News and the U.S. Today Network, focusing on public safety and criminal justice. But recently, he published a groundbreaking piece on the use of force in South Carolina that uncovered some troubling trends in one county where fatal shootings are much more common. To discuss his findings, he's joining us now. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So first, can you give us an overview of your outstanding piece, Lethal Force? Why did you decide to focus on the use of force in South Carolina?
Yeah, sure. Well, this project really started for us early last year in 2018. There was a man in his backyard. He had called 911 asking for help. He explained to the dispatcher he was having a mental health breakdown. And what happened was 4 deputies responded, met him in his backyard. He had a knife. He was sitting down with a knife to his chest. He had already expressed he had bipolar disorder. And the way it happened is, the next few minutes, those 4 deputies who had not received what's considered to be the best mental health training available, they repeatedly shouted, "Drop the knife, drop the knife, drop the knife." At one point, they tried to use a taser on him while he was still sitting down on his back porch. He became agitated. He started pacing around in his backyard, eventually swung the knife, and the 4 deputies discharged their firearms and killed him. And they were, of course, cleared of any wrongdoing, both criminally and from an internal affairs perspective. And but it was a very polarizing shooting and raised a lot of red flags for a lot of people in the community. And so we as a news organization wanted to take a closer look at that, both, of course, with that particular case, but also to see what the numbers showed in terms of this agency. How common is this? How do they compare to the rest of the state? And when it comes time to investigate these kind of things, what's really going into the investigation or not going into the investigation that leads to these types of outcomes? So that's what really started us on the project.
Now, it's really good that you mentioned comparing one of the counties to some of the other counties surrounding in that state, because you found some troubling statistics about a very specific county. Can you tell us what you found there?
Sure. Yeah, we really weren't sure what we were going to find, but what we did was we started with just looking at 10 years of statewide police shooting data that would rank the counties and that sort of thing, in addition to over 24 investigative case files. So not just the statistical stuff themselves from a statewide perspective, but also some really detailed narratives and investigative findings within each of those cases. So we gathered all that up, and what we found was that the Greenville County Sheriff's Office here in South Carolina had handled at least 31 lethal force scenarios, 31 shootings in a 10-year span. South Carolina across the board looked at over 400 police shootings in that 10-year span. And as Greenville compared to the rest of the state, we found that they had almost double the amount of shootings than any other agency had. So yes, they are a large county. They're not twice the size of any other county. So when we look at the per capitas and the disproportionate rates, we found that this sheriff's office here had consistently tallied more and more shootings than anybody else across the state.
One of the things I noticed looking at your reporting is that there was also like sort of some inconsistencies in oversight, because there's this group that's supposed to investigate police shootings. It wasn't always called in. Did you find, tell us about that. There really isn't like an outside agency looking at this, correct?
Right. And so what South Carolina has is they have a statewide agency called the State Law Enforcement Division. And one of their roles is they will, at the request of these departments, do an investigation into a critical incident, a use of force case, and things like that, and including police shootings, of course. And so what we found is, though, that there's no procedure, there's no set policy that says they have to be used. And even when they are used, they are another police agency themselves. So that always, of course, raises the question of, is it true? Is it truly a third party? Is it truly objective and transparent? So there's that issue as well. But based on the agencies, there's nothing that says they even have to use this outside agency to investigate a shooting. We found at least 7 shootings just here in Greenville were never referred to this statewide agency. They just all handled it internally, and of course found no wrongdoing in those cases as well. And we found that that's a bit of a pattern across the state as well, is that some agencies never do report their shootings to SLED, and there's just some inconsistency about the reasons in which they might decide, okay, this time yes or this time no.
Do the agencies have any explanation for this inconsistent implementation? When you ask them, did they explain it?
It's a bit murky. So right. They'll try to say, well, no one was struck in certain shootings where it's, there could be a decent showering of gunfire even, but if no one was struck by a bullet, they'll say, well, we don't need to call SLED for this case. But then there's other times when no one was struck and they do call SLED the same way. And so, they weren't entirely clear on, the reasoning behind it. It's really a case when it comes down to it.
Got it.
So one thing that stood out to me is how many of the cases you looked at and how many people were in some sort of mental distress. And the point is, these cases weren't bank robberies or mass shooters. Are there going to be any policy changes to protect people who are going through mental duress?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that I know lawmakers are looking at. I know we've gotten a lot of great feedback already this week after our project is published. And already I think it's going to start raising some questions about, like you mentioned, the mental health training and whether or not that should be more of a required standard across the board. So more deputies are trained in that so they know what to respond to. Other things that came up were issues of body cameras and how those are used. So part of our project found that body cam use is inconsistent. So we know just in the last few years, body cameras came on the scene, and that was mandated across the board for agencies to equip their own officers with body cameras and create policies around that use. And of course, the policies say to use the cameras, but we found in a number of cases where deputies and officers were just flat out failing to use their cameras, either forgetting to turn them on, claiming that the batteries were dead, claiming that the storage was full.
Wow.
A variety of reasons why they, reported that, I don't actually have the footage for this case. And here we are, as taxpayers saying, here's all this money to equip these officers to capture these incidents, the most critical incidents of their careers. And then to come away from that incident and say, we don't actually have the video evidence, so you're just going to have to take my word for it.
Was there, now it seems like you guys don't have a legal right to, there's no state transparency law that governs, like you don't have a right to see the body camera footage, is that correct?
That's right. So that's the other part about this state, is that in South Carolina, when the FOIA laws were being amended and the body camera laws were being created, the one thing that was included in there is that body cameras would be exempt from public disclosure through the Freedom of Information Act. So even when let's say they're all used perfectly, the public does not have access to body camera footage. They do for dash cam footage, but dash cams are also being phased out because body cameras are being introduced. And so when it comes to law changes and things like that, I know that's going to be another hard look as well to try and amend that to get the public more access. One
thing that struck me about your piece is how many cases were, as Taya brought up, mental illness cases, or cases not like, let's say, someone robbing a bank or kidnapping someone, but rather cases of personal issues that kind of escalated. Is that a trend that you saw? Is that something that's distinct? You could talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
it definitely was the case. There really, when you look at all the different varieties of calls and the reasons behind the police response, there's not a whole lot of, like active shooter or armed bank robbery, that kind of thing. What you see is a lot of, you do see a lot of domestic disturbances, which may or may not have weapons involved. You see a lot of just disturbances in general regarding drug use. So drug use was common. But, other times you just get, alarm calls or disturbances. I mean, we had one shooting where it was a 15-year-old in a car who was just in a car with a girl in a parking lot late at night. Just came in for a disturbance, and he was trying to get away. He got stopped, and the cop immediately got in front of the car, firearm drawns, and get out of the car. And he was trying to shout, like, I don't want to go to jail. And he tried to drive away, and then the shots were fired and so forth. And that wasn't, thankfully. Another time, I mean, you have a homeowner, a panic alarm call. And this actually just came into the news this week because, as we see, he was cleared of any wrongdoing. But responds to this panic alarm and sees a man inside the house through the front window, and sees he has a gun. So he just starts shooting through the window of the front door.
I remember that case,
Come to find out, it was the homeowner, a CW, a concealed weapons carry permit holder, and the homeowner. And he thought he was being broken into. You had this deputy who's banging on his door, and you never know what's going on, and he just goes and fires through the window and shoots him. And that case got national attention, right? Because of that. It did. The New York Times wrote about it and so forth, and it definitely got a lot of national attention. It's still going to get attention just because of the fact that now he's been cleared. We reported it first when he was cleared of internal affairs policies, and we reported it first when we found out he had prior shooting cases that he's been tied to. He shot 3 dogs. He killed a man in 2017.
Jesus. Does the sheriff's department, when you've identified some people who seem to have some issues, do they give them any extra training? Do they do anything to address these problems?
Sure. Yeah, we did find that those officers that were tied to multiple shootings in their career do tend to have more of an extensive misconduct background. So, of course, if there's a misconduct allegation that's sustained, so it's investigated, and they find out, yes, you violated policy or you shouldn't have done this, then they refer them to remedial training and so forth. Other times they'll investigate and say, well, this is unfounded. We don't really have enough evidence to say one way or the other. So, you're in the clear kind of thing.
But has any officer ever been indicted, as far as you know?
No. So in all of the shootings that we looked at over the 10-year span, there were no officers disciplined. Each time,
really
came back the same way, cleared of criminal wrongdoing and cleared of any internal affairs.
Wow.
Violations.
Daniel, you did such a good job about talking about the personal histories of the families of the people killed by police. Can you talk a little bit more about their stories and maybe some of the commonalities between the victims?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with any case, what the point we were trying to drive home is that there's a human cost to all this, on both sides, really. And so what we try to do is really look at the families of the folks who have lost loved ones in police shootings. Because at the end of the day, there's a shooting, it takes place, there's an investigation, the dust settles, they're cleared, and then everybody moves on. At least from a broad perspective. And sure, I'm certain officers struggle to some degree internally with that. But at the end of the day, they're cleared, and so people move on. But what the large public doesn't quite understand is that that family who's missing a loved one, they don't move on. They never move on from something like that. They're without that father, that son, the brother, sister, daughter. And so we tried to highlight those stories. We spent a lot of time with some of these families. The gentleman, Jermaine Massey, I mentioned to you in the beginning about the drop the knife case. Tiffany Copeland was his fiance. They had two young children together. They live in a small home, small community, working family, and it was so heartbreaking to sit down in their living room and have Tiffany, his fiance, just pour her heart out and explain all the various things, whether it be from an emotional standpoint, as far as like an intimacy level goes, or even just practical standpoint, like I need an oil change, the bathtub is clogged, like all these things that her fiance Jermaine, handled. Now it's just her two young kids and this pool of grief that she's just sitting in. It's heartbreaking.
So your big takeaway from this, what do you think needs to be done? I mean, it's not for you to make policy, but looking at it from your perspective as a reporter, do we need to have like body camera transparency? Does the SLED group need to be more transparent about what they do? What do you think from your perspective reporting this needs to change?
Yeah, sure. So I guess for our main takeaway, as far as solutions go, the points we were trying to drive home are primarily the body camera issues. And with that being such a perplexing issue in South Carolina here, where it's not public record. So that would be the first thing that's kind of pointed out as far as solutions in our stories. So body cam being made public, also body cam policy, enforcing the use of that. And there's actually been a proposal in the legislature here about creating penalties and serious repercussions, and even a level of criminal repercussions if the officer fails to use that body camera.
Okay, cool.
Because it's that important.
Right.
Daniel, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, and we're really looking forward to seeing what your next investigation shows us.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And now we're going to do what the title of this show promises, to hold police accountable. And one way we do this is to continue to follow up on the stories we highlight. And that's exactly what we did. 2 weeks ago, we told you the story of Columbus, Ohio resident Nick Pettit. Pettit was filming the Columbus SWAT team when he caught this on his cell phone.
Hey, you ain't supposed to smack him like that. The fuck is wrong with you? Hey, I got all that shit on camera. What's your name, bro? Hey, you wasn't supposed to smack him in the face. The fuck is wrong with you? Hell no, man, I'm on my property. I ain't got to listen to you. Man, I'm on my property. You can't come over here and do nothing to me. Hey, you ain't got a search warrant. You can't come over here, man. Man. Hey, look, I got you all on camera right now. I'm on my private property. Hold on, man. Hold on, man. You're under arrest. For what? Come on. I ain't even do nothing but record this whole situation. What are you doing? Just give me the phone. You're interfering with this. I didn't interfere with nothing. All I said was, Crystal, down.
Pettit was arrested and charged with misconduct during an emergency, but we have sought more information from police. This week, we filed a Public Information Act request for both body camera footage and documents related to the case. We also called Columbus City Attorney Zach Klein to ask why he was continuing to pursue the case. And finally, we spoke to the Ohio chapter of the ACLU and put them in touch with Mr. Pettit. To get an update from him and on his case, he has agreed to join us again. So, hello, Nick. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
Doing great. Thank you so much for being here and giving us an update on your case. So we know you spoke with someone from the Ohio chapter of the ACLU. What did they say?
Actually, they just contacted me yesterday, and they set up an appointment to call me Monday, this coming Monday.
Great.
Roughly around noon. So.
When is your court date, and do you have any idea of what kind of penalty you might be facing? I know you're being charged with misconduct in an emergency, which is kind of unusual statute. Do you have any idea of what kind of time you're facing? When's your court date?
My court date's actually October 7th. And as far as like what penalties I'm looking at, it's a maximum of 30 days in jail and up to a $250 fine.
Oh.
Has your lawyer said like why they're even pursuing this case? Is there any update on what the prosecutor is saying or anything about this case?
Well, I had talked to my attorney at my last court date before the continuance was requested, and he said that the original prosecutor wanted to try it, and he didn't know why, but they switched prosecutors, and now I have a new one, and I'm not sure why they're still trying to pursue the case from this point.
And they asked for a continuance. You know, who asked for a continuance, your side or the prosecutors?
Actually, the judge did. She said that she didn't have time to try the case on that day.
Interesting. Are you going to bring, you said you might have some witnesses, the people who lived across the street from you or something?
Yes, sir. The people who used to live across the street from us, the people that were residing in the house at the time, they ended up being evicted from their home due to that incident. And they said that they wanted to come to the court date and speak, at least try to speak on my behalf if they were allowed to.
So they were not charged, but they were evicted from their home?
Yes. We had our homes, like the home we are leasing to own is through the same property management company that they were leasing their home from.
And they evicted them?
Yes.
Did they say why?
Because the incident was a violation of their lease, I believe.
Oh, no.
Oh, man. Wow,
that's
so
terrible.
how are you doing? Like, how are you dealing with all the controversy? And I mean, you've gotten a lot of attention.
How are you holding up?
How are you holding up?
I'm doing okay. It's still kind of hard to find a job, but I have a lot of people who I know that are willing to help me out here and there. Like I have one of my former bosses. He has his own painting company on the side, so I go help him. He gives me money when he can. I have a couple other friends who are in construction and they need laborers, so I go help them here and there. And then I do mechanic work on the side.
Well, Nick, we promise that we're going to continue to follow up, continue to keep investigating for you. If we get any information, we're going to share it with you. Please let us know if the ACLU in Ohio is able to help you, okay? Because I think anyone who watched that video could honestly say it's an obvious violation of your First Amendment rights, and that's what the ACLU does. So please let us know if they're going to be able to help you, okay?
Yes, ma'am. I actually wanted to update you guys. I've done a little bit of research on misconduct at an emergency, and I thought it was pretty odd that Ohio is the only state that has this as a statute.
Interesting, really? Because I had Lieutenant Fuqua forward me a copy of this statute, but I had no idea that Ohio was one of the only places that has this. That is...
Well, it's a very odd law because, you know, you could just charge someone with assault, or I don't know why you have a law specific to an emergency. It doesn't really make any sense, you know?
Yeah, it kind of caught me off guard. There's a group that kind of, they're all about human rights and, you know, upholding the constitutional rights for the people. And they contacted me and they were looking into a lot of this stuff and they wanted to they wanted to see if they could help me at all. And I kind of gave them the information of what was going on. And they looked everything up and they said, wow, it's kind of weird that this is only a statute in Ohio.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because there are other laws that apply to, you know, misbehavior, or not misbehavior, but, you know, interfering with it, whatever. Why you have this specific statute is beyond me.
Yeah. Very odd.
Yeah.
Very odd.
Thanks for making that
statute.
point.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. So we will continue to follow Nick's case because you can't have a show based upon police accountability without holding police accountable. And to that end, we should remember, in reference to our first segment, that goal is even more important when it comes to use of force. That's because the decision to pull the trigger is irrevocable. Death at the hands of police cannot be relitigated. And the best way to ensure that force is justified is to question it every time it's used. But more importantly, as Daniel's reporting points out, we can't let police be the sole judge of their own behavior. Instead, we need to demand that each and every time an officer pulls a gun, that the public is watching. And most importantly, we are watching. My name's Taya Graham. I'm your host of the Police Accountability Report, and I want you to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us, and we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to us. You can email us tips privately at par@therealnews.com and share your evidence of police misconduct. You can also message us at Police Accountability Report on Facebook or Instagram, or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can message me directly at Taya's Baltimore or Twitter or Facebook. Please subscribe, like, and comment. I do read the comments and appreciate them. I want to thank my co-host, Steve and Janis, for joining me, and I want to thank you for joining me for the Police Accountability Report.